Greetings, everyone. As regular users on SOC teams for Proofpoint's collaboration security solutions, I'm sure you're well versed with these three portals. A day in your life almost always requires hopping across these three portals when you want to investigate and respond to an email threat. So, for example, you'd be searching in email protection, investigating threat details in App Dashboard, remediating if necessary in Cloud Threat Response. While this may have become second nature to some of you that I think I've spoken to in the past, we've clearly heard and seen how this is a less efficient and effective process. And that's really what we set out to change with threat protection work. When a SOC analyst wants to investigate and respond to email threats, Workbench provides a clean, intuitive picture of why or how the email threat was detected and any additional insights and possible remediation actions. We also extend this to use cases like a use research when we started building Workbench, revealed examples of various SOC analyst workflows that are regularly used. We set out to ensure that these pain points suffered for these workflows are with our existing traditional interfaces are vastly improved with Threat Protection Workbench. So we have some of those workflows listed here, and you will see more such examples in the following sections or the following part of today's webinar. And better yet, you'll see this for real when you use Workbench yourself. So how would you do that? Meaning, how would you use Workbench? There are two ways. When you're logged into any of Proofpoint's interfaces, you can see the apps which are at the top as is shown here, and you should see Threat Protection Workbench listed there. You could also just log into threatprotection.proofpoint.com and you should see Workbench appear as a tile and be able to click through into it. In case you don't see either or both of these, it's most likely because you don't have the permissions to access Workbench, and just work with your IT admins or whoever else is in your org who can give you access to permissions to get to Workbench. So this is meant to be a very quick introduction to what we are going to talk about and why. I will now hand it off to Janika to show us real world examples of how customers can use and benefit from Workbench.
Excellent. Thanks, Vivek. And I am so excited to go through these examples. I love Threat Protection Workbench. And just like Vivek said, it really does help streamline so many of the processes that we see analysts and even admins go through in our tooling today. So I wanted to show you first an example of a message that has been condemned as an inbound threat. A very common scenario that we see either with the Proofpoint Protection Server, PPS, where we've blocked a message pre-delivery after identifying it was a threat, or through our Targeted Attack Protection TAP product, which allows us to block messages both pre-delivery and post-delivery via advanced sandboxing. Now, when we look at messages that are condemned as inbound threats, we typically see three core functions that an analyst is going to undertake. And the first thing that they're looking to do, or you guys are looking to do, is understand what the current status of the message is. Was it delivered? Was it blocked at the gateway? And then moving into why Proofpoint felt it was a threat. So understanding that threat context, what was the delivery mechanism, and any additional nuance or forensic that you might need. And then moving into action. So once you understand that status and the threat context, deciding what actions you need to take next. Now, you guys are often moving between different legacy portals. You might be doing a message search in Smart Search for what is the current message status? Was it delivered? Was it blocked at the gateway? You might be going into TAP to understand that threat context and then moving into Cloud Threat Response or maybe even back into the Proofpoint Protection Server to take response actions. And what we see is this leads to a lot of inefficiency, and what we're looking to address and what I find really exciting about Threat Protection Workbench is you can stay in a single place and execute your investigation so much faster and so much easier. So let's start with the message status and look at the different attributes that Threat Protection Workbench provides to help you quickly understand what the status of the message is, and probably more importantly, how you're going to get into that message within Threat Protection Workbench. Now, what is going to differ is instead of going into TAP or into Smart Search, we're going to recommend grabbing a data element that is relevant to that particular message. So in this example, I could grab the threat URL out of the TAP dashboard, or if I received the email notification, I love to grab that message GUID and just copy that out. And then I'm going to go into Threat Protection Workbench. The main landing page of Threat Protection Workbench after you use either the app switcher or direct navigation is our global message search. So global message search is very similar to the Cloud Admin email protection smart search that you guys might or hopefully are familiar with. It's the same attributes. We actually share search history and saved searches between the two systems. So yet again, we're trying to make this as simple and easy to adopt in your current workflows as possible. So drop that message GUID or that other message identifier into the message search. And then once you have identified the message, you can go ahead and click on anywhere in that search result that isn't the check mark on the left-hand side. So up until this point, this should look very familiar to what you guys are doing today, just dropping that into a different portal. Now, once you click on the message, you're going to notice that the message details view is very different than what we see in either Smart Search today or TAP or Cloud Threat Response. And that's by design. This is all meant to be an enhancement and to provide more detail at your fingertips. Now we're trying to understand the current status of the message. One of my favorite features and functions in the upper left next to the subject is we can see the dynamic labeling of the status of the message. So this tells you within a quick glance that this was condemned by Proofpoint and that it already has been removed from the user's mailbox. So right away, that can help inform your next steps and the actions you're going to take. And one important thing to know about these labels is they are dynamic. So let's say that I release this message back to the user and Vivek ran the same search right after me. He would see that dynamic label update to reflect the current status of the message. So better communication across teams and better auditing of the current status of the threat that you're investigating. On the right-hand side, we also have a really wonderful feature called the integrated message timeline. So this is a high-level view of all of the key activities related to the message across all of our threat protection products. So you'll see TPS filtering information from the gateway. You'll see TAP condemnation information. If a message was delivered, you'll see any user interaction on things like permitted clicks or submissions through an abuse mailbox, and then any post-delivery actions like removing the message from the mailbox. So the message timeline is a really excellent way to understand not just the current status of the message, but all of that historical detail on what has transpired before you kicked off your investigation. One of the other really great aspects as you're trying to understand the message status and just the current situation is to look at a quick screenshot of the message itself. So we now know that this message was delivered, but ultimately was removed based on a Proofpoint condemnation post-delivery. If you want to get a quick look at the message itself, you can select the screenshot option in the message details view and do a screenshot rendering in HTML of the message itself. So no need to download the message and potentially impact your machine or introduce any threats to your device, but you can securely take a look at what the user saw in this case or would have received in the case of a pre-delivery block. There are some other really fantastic elements that help you understand the message itself as you're looking to understand the status. So we have the headers of the message. We do pull out some high-level header details, or you can select the view source option and get the full header information for this particular message. One of the other really helpful aspects of Threat Protection Workbench is we have what we call the message trace information from the gateway. So this allows you to see all of the filtering information in terms of the policy routes, spam scoring, and then the rules and modules that fired on this message. So one thing that's particularly interesting about this example is this message did actually score as a malware threat at the gateway, but was ultimately delivered and removed from the mailbox post-delivery. By looking at the message trace here, we can understand that one of the triggered rules was the inbound safe rule. This tells us that there's a misconfigured safe list condition and a misconfigured inbound safe rule that is causing threats to be delivered. So not only do we understand the context of the message itself, but we've quickly identified a misconfiguration to help us remediate any future messages similar to this being delivered. Another aspect that you may want to take a look at are the data elements of the message itself in terms of URLs and attachments. So there's two different ways to view this. This URLs and attachments view under message analysis gives you the full details on which URLs and which attachments were seen in a message. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that first URL is identified with a unique icon. That's identifying for you that this is the condemned element that we saw in sandboxing and ultimately what caused us to condemn this message. But we still want you to have the visibility on other URLs and attachments that might be in that message. Right above that, you also have the ability to download the message as an EML file and do further investigation if you wanted to look at that in your own sandbox. Hopefully you see that with just a handful of elements and a couple of different clicks, we get a comprehensive view of the message itself and a much better understanding of the current status of the message. So from here, once we understand that context, we're going to move into understanding why this message was condemned as a threat. And understanding that threat context, yet again, Workbench is trying to make that an easier process for you. And that all starts with our email insights panel. So directly on the main landing page of the message details view, we have an email insights panel. This is going to bubble up interesting information about the message. It could be AI inferred themes, different warning tags, but primarily with threat condemnations on inbound messages, you're going to see the key forensic artifacts that we saw in the sandboxing and condemnation of the message. So you no longer have to go digging in all those forensic reports within the TAP dashboard. We're trying to present it here on the main landing page so that you can quickly and easily reference that. Now, if you do need to go a layer deeper, you can always go into the Threat Insights tab within Threat Protection Workbench. That will bring you into kind of a mid-level view of the threat details. And I like to think of this as kind of the high-level forensic observations. With this particular URL, we didn't see any click activity, but if we did see clicks, either permitted clicks or block clicks on a rewritten URL, those details would be presented here as well, along with IP and browser information, so you can take any additional next steps easily based on that information. We'll also see different information like the families and different threat techniques that were observed, in addition to the severity of the threat and spread information that you guys are used to leveraging within the TAP dashboard. Now, there is an additional layer of threat analysis. So if you do need that full view of kind of the forensic reports and full sandbox reports, within Threat Protection Workbench, that data does live as well, and you can easily pivot into that same view that you're familiar with from the TAP dashboard. So kind of three different layers, starting with email insights as our top layer, threat analysis as our mid layer, and then ultimately going into the full threat details if you needed to go to that level. Now, once we understand that threat condemnation, we may want to also look at the sender profile. So the sender analysis tab can be really helpful in terms of understanding different envelope sender, header from, and reply to addresses. And we will also do a domain registry lookup for each of these domains. So sometimes when I work with customers, we'll see different values for, say, reply to, with that being maybe a newly registered domain, where the threat actor is attempting to have this message appear to come from a more legitimate entity, but ultimately has newly registered infrastructure that they're using as part of this campaign. By bringing these insights directly into Threat Protection Workbench, we're trying to save you time by not having to pivot into a lookup tool or an external source to identify this information. We'll even go so far as to flag dates that are registered or have updated within the last 90 days to make it easy to reference in the course of your investigations. And then also providing the insight of things like email authentication, so that if you want to understand, did this message pass DMARC or have any SPF or DKIM results, right there at kind of a click of a button within the sender analysis tab. So at this point, we understand the message status, we understand the threat context. In the historical tools of our legacy UIs, you would need to pivot into different dashboards in order to take response actions. The big powerhouse component of Threat Protection Workbench, in my mind, is the fact that we overlay not only this rich data about the message and the threat itself, but we overlay that with response actions as well. So if we take, for example, the URL that was condemned in this particular example, if you're licensed for our virtual takedown service, you can directly submit that URL to our takedown team. to mitigate that threat at the source for the URL that is being abused in these attacks. You can also take different block list actions. So if there were concerning attachments or different hashes of interest in this campaign, with a single click from that attribute, you can add that hash to the block list or take a very similar action from either an envelope sender or header from condition if you wanted to add that sending address to the organizational block list and prevent future messages from that same sending address from being delivered. One nice thing to note about these block list entries is that we do give you the ability to add comments, and we do recommend that as a best practice as well. That provides you with context in your block list around why a particular entry was added and helps your team members understand the context around a particular entry. All of that is done seamlessly with a quick pop-up when you select the option. So within just 2 clicks, you can add that to the block list and significantly prevent future threats from being delivered. Now, there are some additional actions that you'll see in Threat Protection Workbench in the upper right. So we do see some quick action options. In this case, because it was a message that was delivered and then removed from the mailbox, we have the option, a quick option to release the message. But if we open up this actions dropdown, we see that there's more actions that we could take. So we could release it in different ways, maybe with a scan or in an encrypted format, or we could resubmit this back to Proofpoint as well. One of the greatest new features, in my opinion, of Threat Protection Workbench is the ability to do something called a threat flip. So this is the ability to take interesting threats like this one and flip this into user training through a phishing simulation. But in order to do that, we need the message to be in a specific quarantine folder. It specifically needs to be the phish quarantine folder. And if you look at the timeline, we can easily see that this message is sitting in the attachment defense folder. So we aren't going to be able to successfully flip that into a phishing simulation. Now, the good news is the dropdown within Threat Protection Workbench makes this a quick and easy action where I can select that move option and specify the unique quarantine folder that I want to move this into. So in this case, I want to move it into phish. If you have other processes or other workflows built out of different folders, you can easily search based on those folder names and move the quarantine message into those as well. Now, once I move that message into the phish folder, I can then go back into the actions dropdown and convert that to threat flip. What that is going to do is using AI, we're going to take the message and sanitize that and essentially make it safe for user consumption in a phishing simulation. So you can take real threats that you are seeing today in your environment and with the click of a button, flip those into phishing simulations to better protect and inform your users. So in this particular example, like you may have seen on one of our recent blog post entries, we're seeing a lot of abuse of phishing lures that are mentioning or referencing the conflict in Iran. And so if you're looking at this as an analyst and saying, hey, this is a interesting threat, right? Something that I think we should do in simulations or get our users to be more knowledgeable about, you can go directly from that screenshot view, put it in the right folder, and then you'll see over on the right-hand side in that timeline view that it's directly pushed over into the ZenGuide portal as a template that you can use in your phishing simulations. So taking the response actions that you are executing today and turning that into meaningful training for your users that can inform their decision and really empower them to protect your organization. So where does that leave us in this particular TAP example? We looked at a lot in terms of the dynamic tagging and the timeline in terms of understanding the message status. We looked at the different elements and the different layers that provide us with that threat context and that sender information. And then the ability to quickly respond through things like block list entries or the threat flip feature that we're all very excited about. But what this means for you, I think, is even more important, which is that your investigations are going to be completed faster and easier. So that means more work completed and faster turnover on the alerts and the responses that you need to take. The other main use case that we see for SOC analysts within our tooling is around user reported messages. So this could be a submission through the abuse mailbox, or it could be a selection of our report suspicious button in an email warning tag or the button in the mail client. And we know that this is sometimes a high volume submission source for analysts to conduct a review of messages that we've analyzed and deemed a manual review message. Now, the review process on these is similar in that we certainly want to understand the current status of the message, as well as take those response actions. But because these are deemed manual review and essentially suspected benign messages, what you're really leveraging in this case is scrutinizing the message context itself, because we haven't condemned this as a threat, and you are reviewing it as a human analyst. So if we think about the message status and the different features that facilitate this in the TAP example, it's going to be very similar in the abuse mailbox example. The dynamic tagging is going to be a little bit different. The timeline is going to have different entries. But at the end of the day, those features are going to speed and simplify the process of understanding what occurred with that message before you received an alert or notification alerting you to the need to review it. So where I want to start is within that message context, and we'll take a look at some of those features and functions that support you as you look to understand the message itself. But first, let's take a look at how you're going to get into Threat Protection Workbench, specifically targeting these manual review notification or manual review submissions. So hopefully this notification is familiar to you, a lot of you here. This is sent from our Cloud Threat Response platform, alerting the analyst that a message requires manual review. So it's fallen into that manual review bucket, and it's informing the analyst that they need to take a look. Alternative approaches to being informed of these manual reviews could be going into the Cloud Threat Response interface and working the open incident queue to closure, or leveraging the Cloud Threat Response API to push manual review details into your preferred system, your SIM, your ticketing system, or even another SOAR platform. So similar to the top example, you're going to grab that relevant data element either from the message that you're looking at in Cloud Threat Response, from the notification that you're receiving, or from that alert that you're reviewing in your SIM or your SOAR platform. In this example, I'm working off of the email notification, so I could either grab the subject, which if it's unique enough, you could leverage that, or you could copy out the message identifier, which is the message ID. If you are going to select the message ID, just note that those are defanged. So what we do is we put brackets around both periods and @ symbols. So if you are leveraging the message ID, just make sure that you remove those data elements before inputting that into global message search. One of the really exciting things with Threat Protection Workbench and abuse mailbox submissions is we now have a dedicated view that presents all of your end user submissions within Threat Protection Workbench. You'll select this folder icon on the left-hand side with the question mark, and you'll be brought to the view of all those submissions, along with our analysis of the message and the current status of the message. Now, whichever way you choose to get into the user-reported message, whether it's grabbing that data element and running it through global message search, or selecting a message off of the abuse mailbox view, you're going to be brought into a very similar message details view to what we saw for our TAP example, with a few key differences. So if we look at the dynamic tagging in the upper left, we'll notice that this is identified with our disposition. So yet again, we're trying to present you with the real-time status of the message. We know that one of the most important elements of that status in a clear review is understanding the disposition of the message. Within the message timeline view, you will see different data elements for this as well. So because this was reported by a user, we will see the submission from the user, the analysis process within Cloud Threat Response, and then ultimately notifications being sent out to the user to let them know that the message is being reviewed. So the dynamic labeling and the message timeline still assist you in understanding quickly and easily what the status of the message is, but it's tailored to the specific type of message that we have, in this case, a user-reported submission. One of the other really interesting things with user-reported messages that's new within Threat Protection Workbench is we will include in the Email Insights panel a reporter insight or reporter confidence, if you will. So you can see that in my lab system, I report a lot of junk and just messages that are benign. So Threat Protection Workbench is doing a good job of identifying that I am not a very confident reporter. I tend to report a lot and I don't often report threats. What you'll see in your submission activity is users that do commonly report threats that you can be a bit more confident in their submissions, though they will be flagged differently in the Email Insights panel, giving you just one additional signal that you can use in your evaluation of the message. One other element that's extremely helpful on these manual review messages is that message screenshot that we talked about. So this is a way for you to quickly and easily see what the user saw prior to hitting that button or sending the message to the abuse mailbox and make your own determination on, am I concerned with this message, or are there elements of concern that I can see here? So it can be used in either the tap case or the clear case. I would argue maybe a little bit helpful in the clear case where we don't have as much in terms of the threat condemnation and additional detail. Another important area when understanding that message context for user-reported messages are the message headers. So by going into the message analysis in the headers view, you can select this view source option and be able to see the comprehensive headers that we saw on the message and conduct additional evaluation or analysis of those to help inform your decision of where to act next. And then finally, in terms of understanding that message context, sender analysis and URLs and attachment are both helpful places that can help you understand both the sender profile for the message that was reported, in addition to the different URLs and attachments that we saw within that message, with a helpful feature being that you can open up URLs in isolation, so you can securely and easily navigate to the site within your browser and see what the user would have been led to had they clicked on a link. So at this point, we understand the message status. We understand what has transpired so far, Proofpoint's analysis, and we understand the message context, having gone through the screenshots and the headers and all those great different elements within the Threat Protection Workbench view. So now it comes to response. And this is really closing the loop with the end user that reported the message and then taking appropriate action based on your analysis. So one important thing to know about Threat Protection Workbench and clear submissions, or excuse me, end user submissions in particular, is they are supported by the automation workflows, specifically our manual workflows within Cloud Threat Response. So we'll look here in a second at some of the different data elements in the UI view for Threat Protection Workbench. But if you want to know exactly where those configurations live, you only need to go into the workflows view within Cloud Threat Response. We have some system workflows that are pre-configured as mark as safe and mark as threat, which are tagged with Workbench. And then any custom workflows that you have set to trigger on messages will be viewable within Threat Protection Workbench as well. The nice thing is you can configure and adjust or customize these as needed. You just need to use that app switcher to pivot into Cloud Threat Response in order to do so. So looking at the flip side of that, as you review this message within Threat Protection Workbench, we see those buttons that are driven by those workflows within Cloud Threat Response. So if I wanted to use the default mark as threat option, I can select that and it'll trigger that manual workflow for me. In this case, I have a custom workflow, the reviewed assessment malware workflow. So this is a workflow that I use when I've reviewed a message and my assessment is malware. It allows me to quarantine the message, reply back to the user, as well as take some additional custom action and add in some notes in my incident record within Cloud Threat Response. After I execute that workflow within Threat Protection Workbench, you'll notice that the tagging has changed. Yet again, these labels are dynamic. They are meant to make it easy to reference and easy to see what the current status of the message is. So the disposition has changed to malware to reflect my assessment of the message. And we see that the message was successfully removed from the mailbox. So anyone else coming in and taking a look at the message will see the current status and the action that I took all noted within the integrated message timeline. So it helps for auditing purposes, helps for review. It also helps for more seamless communication within larger analyst teams as you're looking at previously worked messages. Another nice element of Threat Protection Workbench is the abuse mailbox view will dynamically update as well. So we saw within the message view that the status had updated to malware, or excuse me, disposition had updated to malware, and the message was successfully removed. If Vivek was looking at the abuse mailbox view, he would also see that update to reflect the current status. One nice thing that you can do with this abuse mailbox view is filter on the disposition of manual review. Then as soon as anyone on the team changes the disposition from manual review, they'll be removed from the queue. So yet again, better communication and better visibility on the actions that you're taking. One other really helpful action that we see for user-reported messages is adding the sender to the block list. So yet again, something that we see leveraged quite a bit with tap alerts, but particularly for manual review messages that you have deemed a threat, after you execute that workflow, you can take the additional action to blocklist either that envelope sender or header from address and prevent future delivery of the threat. Now, one final feature that I find really helpful in the clear submission case, and we hear a lot of really good feedback from our users, is pivoting from the single message view into the larger context of mail flow. So in this example, we have a single message that was submitted that we're looking at in the message details view. If I hover over my cursor to go over the envelope sender, I will get this little magnifying glass on the right-hand side. What that allows me to do is add that unique data element, in this case, the envelope sender address, to a message query builder that kind of starts in the bottom right of, or builds in the bottom right of your screen. And the idea here is to give you the tools as the analyst to identify what other messages within Mailflow may have similar attributes. So let's say I wanted to look at this particular envelope sender and this particular subject line. I can easily hover over those attributes, click that magnifying glass, and add those to my query builder. Once the query is built, I can run that search, and it's going to open up in a new tab in my browser a global message search with exactly those attributes. So just a few clicks and I'm able to pivot from that single message view into the larger Mailflow context of other messages with those same attributes. So we see in this example that we had one message that was reported, but there's actually 5 other messages that have been unreported by the users that were sent via different message IDs. So by pivoting with Query Builder into the larger context of Mailflow, I'm able to understand that the threat wasn't isolated just to the user who reported the message, but the scope is a bit larger. Now, because Threat Protection Workbench is designed for response, I can easily go from this message search result and export those results back into Cloud Threat Response for automatic remediation. So I've taken a single message review or a manual review message, acted on that, and then mitigated 5 additional messages that users had not seen yet and had not been removed from mailboxes. So increasing the impact of your investigation and remediation of threats that your users are reporting. So what does this leave you with as the analyst? Really, it's more streamlined message investigation, bringing together the message status, dynamically updating and providing you with that full audit trail in the message timeline, a much more robust message context that includes things like message screenshots and URL screenshots, overlaid with the ability to take action, making you faster in your reviews and more efficient with removing messages or replying back to the user as needed. And this is something that I hear again and again from the customers that I work with. Customers love the features of Threat Protection Workbench, but what they love more is the time savings that they get by doing their investigations within this new tool. Now, I know old habits are hard to break. We're all used to logging into admin.proofpoint.com to get into Smart Search or have the top dashboard bookmarked. My challenge for you would be spend an hour in Threat Protection Workbench. The next time you get a tap alert, copy out that message GUID or another data element and drop that into the Threat Protection Workbench global message search to see what what we can present to you on that particular threat. The next time you get a manual review notification from Cloud Threat Response, copy out that subject or the message ID, drop it into global message search, or find it within the abuse mailbox view and see just how much faster your investigations and your review can be by looking at these messages within Threat Protection Workbench.